this came on. From the beginning, our goal was to create an engaging, informative, and entertaining evening, bringing together newly diagnosed patients, long-time survivors, their family and friends. And I hear that there's an absolute legion of you on this call tonight. This quickly became one of the most anticipated annual events on our calendar. For long-term survivors, it was a welcome reunion, a chance to reconnect and to rejoice. And for newly diagnosed patients, it was an opportunity to meet long-time survivors and be inspired to see that it was possible to live well with cancer, no matter what stage of cancer or what stage of treatment you were at. I like this quote from the United States-based National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship. "The real challenge of cancer is to live as best as one can for as long as one can. The strength one must have to face the unknown every day, the courage one must muster each time they enter a doctor's office, wait for test results, or receive treatment, and the vulnerability they must endure throughout the cancer journey, regardless of outcome, defines the experience." Although COVID-19 has prevented us from meeting in person this year, we decided to do the next best thing, gather everyone together via the magic of Zoom. And long may Zoom live. It's really helped us through this pandemic, and we welcome you all here tonight. And now I would like to introduce Sylvie Gregoire, the Chair of Hope and Cope's Volunteer Advisory Council, who will speak to you. Welcome, Sylvie.
Merci, Suzanne. Merci pour ton dévouement si essentiel et précieux au bénéfice de l'espoir, c'est la vie. C'est effectivement un privilège et tellement inspirant d'être en compagnie de vous tous, survivants du cancer et de vos proches, rassemblés pour cette célébration annuelle de la vie. J'ai moi-même affronté ce diagnostic alors que j'avais 38 ans, mais je suis ici et en santé 19 ans plus tard. Peu après la fin de mes traitements, j'ai joint l'Espoir, c'est la vie à titre de bénévole et j'ai aujourd'hui l'honneur de présider le Conseil consultatif des bénévoles. Il y a près d'1 an, j'ai pris la relève de Ida Tioli, qui a présidé le Conseil pendant plusieurs années. Le Conseil consultatif des bénévoles fournit du soutien et des recommandations aux employés et à la direction de l'Espoir, c'est la vie, notamment quant au bien-être et à la formation des bénévoles et au déroulement des activités auprès des patients. Nous représentons tous ces bénévoles qui aident l'Espoir, c'est la vie à remplir sa mission qui est d'être un phare pour toute personne touchée par le cancer. Tel que l'a mentionné Suzanne, l'Espoir, c'est la vie organise cette célébration pour la 33e année. Cet événement, créé par une bénévole, Jessica Miller, existe toujours grâce à tous les bénévoles qui ont pris la relève. L'objectif de la célébration est de souligner le courage, la résilience, l'optimisme et l'espoir qui ont permis aux patients atteints de cancer de traverser cette épreuve, qu'ils soient avec nous aujourd'hui ou dans nos cœurs et nos mémoires. Il ne s'agit pas uniquement de survivre à un diagnostic de cancer, mais de profiter de ce cadeau qu'est la vie. We have lots of survivors here this evening, so I invite you all to hold up your signs indicating how many years you've been living as a cancer survivor. Je vous invite maintenant à lever votre affiche à l'enseigne sur laquelle vous avez inscrit le nombre d'années dont la vie vous a fait cadeau depuis votre premier diagnostic de cancer. Si vous n'avez pas votre affiche, ajoutez le chiffre dans la boîte de clavardage. If you do not have your sign, just include the number of years in the chat box. And I will give you a few seconds to scroll through les écrans pour voir le nombre d'années qu'on a vécu avec le cancer et toutes les expériences et réalisations qui ont pu prendre place pendant ces années. C'est inspirant de voir tous ces chiffres-là. Alors, affronter le cancer, demeurer fort, apprendre à défendre ses intérêts et à naviguer dans le système de santé, tout cela exige beaucoup d'énergie, physiquement et émotivement. Je le sais car je l'ai vécu moi-même. Et c'est ce qui distingue l'espoir, c'est la vie. Nos bénévoles ont traversé cette épreuve. La plupart des 300 et plus bénévoles ont eu à faire face à un diagnostic de cancer, soit personnellement ou pour l'un de leurs proches. C'est ce qui les rend aptes à vous aider à cheminer et à avancer malgré un diagnostic de cancer grâce à une variété de services et de programmes de soutien. Depuis 40 ans, alors que Mme Sheila Kastner a fondé l'Espoir, c'est la vie, les bénévoles en sont le cœur et les mains. Ils donnent beaucoup, mais ils reçoivent encore plus. Tel que le soulignait l'abbé Pierre, on n'est jamais aussi heureux que dans le bonheur qu'on donne. Donner, c'est recevoir. Now, I would like to call upon volunteer extraordinaire, Barbara Hobbs, who will introduce our guest speaker. Barbara?
Thank you, Sylvie. As a volunteer who has been part of the Survivorship Day Planning Committee for several years, it is my pleasure this evening to introduce our fabulous guest speaker, Susan Doherty. Susan is an award-winning Montreal author. A graduate of Concordia University, she began her career at Maclean's magazine in Toronto. After a brief stint in Paris, she returned to Canada where she studied creative writing and was mentored through the Humber School for Writers. While raising her two sons with her husband, Hal Hannaford, she managed her own advertising production company for 18 years and then decided to devote herself to writing full-time. Her award-winning debut novel, A Secret Music, was published in 2015. Her second book, The Ghost Garden, won the Quebec Writers Federation Mavis Gallant Prize for nonfiction. She is currently at work on her third book. Committed to community service, Susan volunteers at the Douglas Institute and Chez Doris. She is a deeply spiritual person, a gifted communicator, and we are so lucky to have her with us. The story she will share with us this evening is not a work of fiction, though. It does not come from her imagination. It is her own personal story of how she survived a deadly illness and the lessons she learned from her harrowing experience. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Susan Doherty.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who has come out tonight to acknowledge the unbelievable support of Hope and Cope. I would especially like to thank Hinda Goodman for believing that I had something worthwhile to say. Her empathy was emblematic of my entire experience at the Jewish General Hospital. So it goes without saying that this talk is dedicated to my fellow survivors. We are awesome. Just days ago, I became a 5-year veteran. My health journey is not unique in that hundreds and thousands of others have had cancers and autoimmune diseases and blood disorders. And so I'm honored to represent all those who've tread the deepest ruts of this very path. It's a well-worn road because of the many people who have walked beside me these last 5 years. Something this momentous is rarely navigated alone. An uncluttered path does not exist, not for anyone, cancer or no cancer. I happen to be standing here, but your story is just as vital as mine, and maybe one day I will be lucky enough to hear yours. So at the outset, I would like to underline one of the many things I now know. The physical pain of what I went through is nothing compared to the existential pain, the emotional upheaval. It's the idea of running a marathon without any practice, When you lie awake at night, you wonder how it's all going to unfold. And do you have the stamina to cross the finish line without breaking down first? Psychological pain is at its worst when situations in our life do not line up with our expectations. Is this really happening to me? That was one of my hurdles. Don't get me wrong, nausea, black diarrhea, and 24 nosebleeds are not something to sign up for, but dealing with your thoughts, your fears, and the negative thinking that are inherent to any struggle, not just a medical one, is the real fight. So my story began at 3 p.m. on February 25th, 2015. I'm referring to my crisis, a Greek word that means the turning point of a disease, indicating either recovery or death. We've all had turning points, and this was the most significant of mine, a curveball that became a moment of enlightenment. So while attending a conference in Boston with my husband, I was shivery and cold. But that week in New England, 239 centimeters of snow had tumbled from the sky, and the downtown streets were freakishly lined with 3-meter walls of snow. I convinced myself I was cold because of the weather. I was shaking so profoundly, I left the conference hall for my hotel room and filled the bathtub with hot water. The hot bath seemed to do the trick, except that as I was dressing to return to the conference, my body broke into a profound sweat. Not your ordinary run-of-the-mill sweat. My ankles, thighs, hands, and forearms were sweating. I was the Trevi fountain of sweat. And then it stopped. I was fine, as though something nefarious had simply breezed through my body and disappeared. Unbeknownst to me, it was my first case of rigors, an extreme reflexive response to exaggerated shivering. It's what the soldiers felt in the damp trenches of the First World War when they had contracted tuberculosis. Sweating is the body's attempt to cool itself. But after an hour, it all stopped. I got dressed and I went back to the conference thinking I was coming down with the flu. If only. The problem was that the next night I had another hour-long session of extreme sweating. The mattress was wet beneath me. After 10 days of these night sweats, I went to a walk-in emergency clinic at the Queen Elizabeth. One of the things the doctor did was ask me about my personal life. I said that, among other things, I had a broken arm. I was teaching spinning 3 days a week at the Y, on deadline with the final edit of my first novel, volunteering on a psychosis ward with people who have schizophrenia, moving my mother who'd had a small stroke. My mother-in-law was about to die of Alzheimer's, and my husband was in the midst of a depression. The doctor at the Queen Elizabeth looked at me, and she said, "There's nothing wrong with you. It's called anxiety." Oh, thank God. To be honest, I was thrilled with that diagnosis. I thought maybe I had a threatening disease or something. I danced away feeling as light as a bag of cotton candy. I had ways to deal with stress, so I told myself. In reality, all 5,000 cement blocks that were holding up the Jacques Cartier Bridge were collapsing, and I didn't see it. I finished the final edit of my first book, A Secret Music, and planned a book tour. The engine of my daily life was running smoothly, except that for 5 months and 9 days, I continued to have profuse mattress-soaking night sweats. In early May, I went to my family doctor because something had to be wrong. My blood work indicated some kind of non-specific infection. She prescribed antibiotics. Next up were enlarged lymph nodes under my chin as though a pearl necklace had been sewn underneath my skin. Very painful, very elusive. 1 week they were there, the next they weren't. I could still fool myself that I was okay. On May 20th, a voice woke me up and told me to take my temperature. I sat up like a bolt, had to find a thermometer, and realized I had a fever of 40.2 degrees. That's over 104 if you're not quite metric. It's crazy how the universe or God or the divine will do whatever it can to get our attention. My family doctor sent me to 3 specialists. Meanwhile, my daughter, who was a medical student, had palpated my belly and found 2 large lumps near my hip bones. I had an emergency CAT scan, but when a second scan was ordered a few days later, the masses were gone, ghostly shells instead of anything to treat. It was all very hard to pin down. It meant that I could do book events and volunteer at the Douglas and continue to teach spinning. The next specialist, upon viewing the scans and feeling enlarged lymph nodes in several quadrants of my body, told me I had stage 4 lymphoma. He said in the kindest way possible that I needed to see an oncologist and that I should start chemo as soon as possible, perhaps even in the next 2 days. He said I could expect 5 years. He was holding a box of Kleenex in each hand because I guess he's given that news a few times. I cried all the way home, and I had that run over by a bus feeling. I did say to myself, thank God it's me and not my children, although I worried for my mother. It's against the natural order of things when a child gets sick before a parent. Dr. Lebel turned out to be mistaken about the lymphoma, but his ominous prediction did propel me to the next stage. That same night, a friend connected me to Dr. April Shami, a superb hematologist, oncologist, and a Selwyn House mother of 2 wonderful boys. She could see me the next morning at the Jewish at 7:30 in the morning. I had more blood tests. Still nothing turned up. I did have 1 lymph node under my chin that was the size of a golf ball. Dr. Shami ordered a lymph node biopsy. Trust me when I say a neck biopsy is not nearly as good as it sounds. 7 needles were inserted into this intensely painful lymph node to extract fluid. Those aspirations were sent for pathology. They still found nothing. No cancer, no leukemia, no diseases like tuberculosis or AIDS or Stills, which all are illnesses with similar symptoms. I laugh when I remember that 2 days after the biopsy, I had a radio interview with a classical music station in Toronto. With my lovely purple neck, I looked like I'd been strangled half to death, but the interviewer breezed right through the talk as if he had no eyes. You see, it wasn't just me who was ignoring what was happening to my body. Next, a bone marrow biopsy came back negative, ruling out a lot of typical blood disorders. This whole time, I was living my life in every normal way. In hindsight, I was definitely hurling down a black tunnel, but I had every intention of launching my book and honoring my commitments at the YMCA and the Douglas. That single-mindedness has also given me great pause. We are able to compensate when we need to. I now know that adrenaline and endorphins were overriding something terrible that was percolating in my body. We've all heard the story of the young mother who lifted up a car because her baby was caught underneath the transmission. The right neurotransmitters can help us punch far above our weight. I was ecstatic about the release of my book. After 4 long years of rejection letters that could wallpaper a small bathroom, edits, rewrites, and delays, I had received 34 rejection letters. But J.K. Rowling had 46, so I was still feeling pretty optimistic. I tried to give my ongoing fevers and night sweats, which had become 4 hours a night, as little headspace as possible. Despite becoming more and more sleep deprived, my second compensation was done with exercise. Exercise may have been the single biggest mitigating factor that kept me alive in those early days when a fatal blood disorder was parked at my front door and at my back door. I was running and spinning and teaching a boot camp on Wednesday nights. I'm 100% certain that exercise kept me afloat for far longer than I should have. It certainly meant that my heart and lungs were strong when I needed them down the road. But the big dam had not yet broken. My busy, crowded lifestyle was a blessing and a curse. I am convinced that my life actually launched my illness. The same way that the environment can trigger mental illness, stress and being overburdened may not give you a near fatal disease or schizophrenia or cancer, but in my opinion, it can turn the key and open the gate. Illness is not the Immaculate Conception. I think that each and every one of us has the capacity for illness. Those genes lie dormant. Maybe it's the BRCA gene or breast cancer or colon cancer or leukemia. If we're smart, we have mechanisms in place to keep ourselves in balance. For certain, I was out of balance. In the end, it turned out that I had an underlying genetic condition, but why did it come to life when it did? Many times I've asked myself, what part did I play in waking up a sleeping dragon? Women are especially vulnerable because we carry so much responsibility for the other people in our lives. We're hardwired to pile on the stress and convince ourselves we're okay. In May, June, and July, I did a mini book tour, ending every single night with intense night sweats. I had a fever at every event. I was also ridiculously happy. The mind is a very powerful tool. In July, Dr. Shami gave me permission to go on vacation in Maine because nobody had found anything wrong with me. There was nothing to treat. I happily went to Kennebunk, but deep down, there was a gnawing sensation of doubt. Your body is telling you when something is wrong. I ran my regular running loop with my sister, and to be honest, I was very tired. I deluded myself that for the sake of my book, the cliff that I thought was way over there, a place I would reach when I'm 97 years old, was a fingernail away. In Maine, I got sick the way Ernest Hemingway says people go broke, gradually and then suddenly. My 3-part symptoms of chills, fever, and sweating started to occur around the clock, not just at night. And then in case I needed a final wake-up call, the right side of my face went numb. I couldn't feel my gums or my nose, and I tried not to think about brain cancer. I took 1,000 milligrams of Tylenol, and we left Maine in a bit of a flurry and headed straight to the emergency ward at the Jewish General Hospital. During the drive to the hospital was the beginning I spoke about, my enlightenment. By the time we were on Highway 26, I had a fever of 105, and it was a 5-hour drive. My husband's hands were shaking so badly I was worried he would drive off the road. But then 3 things happened. The founder of the State of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, once famously said, "If you don't believe in miracles, you're just not being realistic." And so on a steamy August day, in August of 2015, I received 3 miracles in one day, as if I might not have faith had I only been given one. The first was that in the sky, we both saw a giant cloud in the shape of an angel with outstretched wings. If Hal hadn't seen it too, I might have thought I made it up, that perhaps the fever was causing me to see things that weren't there. We looked at each other with a, "Do you see what I see?" I felt protected by an outside force. Of course, I was praying to God anyway because my fever was so high, I was in danger of having heat stroke. I was beginning to feel outside of my body. I remember the windshield was shimmering when I leaned my face into the air conditioning vents to try and stay cool. The next thing that happened was that when we got to the Canadian border, we were the only car at the gate. It was the last day of the Quebec construction holiday, and the lineups to return to Canada had been crazy all day. Even the man at the border peered deep into the car because maybe my husband was a diplomat or a foreign prime minister, and his delegation was 200 meters back blocking the road. And thirdly, at the emergency room at the Jewish, I was the lone patient. How often does that happen on a busy summer weekend in Quebec? All this to say, the doors were opening, and I was very aware that something bigger than myself was working on my behalf. It helped me feel safe, even when my blood pressure dropped precariously to 70/40. I sat up on the gurney to tell everyone I was perfectly all right and not to worry, except that Hal said I was speaking some foreign language that nobody could understand. By now, I could no longer will myself well, but I still didn't have a diagnosis. In the next 5 days, I had every medical test ever invented by scientists, overseen, of course, by my beloved Dr. Shami. I had bone marrow biopsies, lumbar punctures, lung scans, MRIs of my body and brain, CAT scans, PET scans, and blood tests. I was taking 4,000 milligrams of Tylenol a day to combat the round-the-clock fevers. My face was numb. My 19-year-old son, who had flown in from New York City, was by my bedside, and I will never forget the stricken look on his face and feeling utterly powerless to help him. And then on August the 6th, the hematology oncology team at the Jewish finally found out what was wrong. I had a rare blood disorder called HLH that very few people have even heard of, doctors included. It mostly affects babies and young children. Hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. I know, who thinks up these names, but it is a really good Scrabble word. HLH affects 1 in a million adults. A sample of my blood was flown to Toronto to confirm their suspicion, as there is no hospital in Quebec with the protocol to confirm HLH. It's that rare. HLH behaves like a cancer, but in a nutshell is an overactive immune reaction, and I needed to start chemotherapy within a few hours. Without treatment, a patient dies within 60 days of multi-organ failure, and they were not sure where I was on that trajectory. Your immune system is your security detail. It turns on if you have a cold or a sore throat, as it's supposed to, and then it turns off. With HLH, it never turns off. Think of a driverless and powerful John Deere lawnmower in your backyard, destroying everything in sight. But once HLH was identified, I was hurried into a chemotherapy protocol that very evening. The death rate for HLH is over 70%. And so when I say how fortunate I am to have had the diagnosis in time, I feel truly blessed. Because of its rarity, it's often overlooked. People die before they know what's wrong. I was diagnosed on August 6th, 2015. It was both the darkest, scariest night of my life and the most spiritual. With Elise and Reed, my children, and Hal crowded into 2 beds in my room, I had my first dose of chemo. My family went home, and a few hours later, HLH launched its final spear. The chills began in earnest, followed by a fever that went up and up and up. During the height of the fever, I made contact with the other side. I had visions where I saw my deceased father crying. He was stricken. I saw grief scrawled across his face, but he was saying, "Go back and fight. It's not your time." I was hallucinating images that I can still see clearly today. I saw the diseased cells in my body. I saw the walls of my bone marrow. I saw macrophages eating my blood cells. My father kept appearing, and I saw his agony. The chills, fever, and night sweats lasted 7 hours, and then it was over, like blowing out a candle. When the fever broke, I felt a sort of bliss overtake my mind and body, like I had run through a burning forest and made it to the other side with my shoes on fire, but nothing else. My gratitude was infinite. I said thank you to God over and over and over again. I said thank you for this intense feeling of bliss. Sometime during the fever stage, I had what I will call a thought transmission. I had the surest feeling that I had received a message from the divine. I would be well, and the purpose of my life would be revealed. From that exact moment of crystal clarity, I began my recovery with positivity and the certainty that my health would return. After receiving that message, I have never looked back. It was the greatest gift. There's an Asian proverb that says one strong tree can carry the weight of 40,000 birds. I had mostly seen myself in my role as a lifelong volunteer and a mother and a wife and a friend as being one of those sturdy trees. But then that night with HLH raging, my tree bent near to the ground. But when the fever began to break, it was as though 1,000 hands were lifting me back up. It was the single most powerful moment of my life in my spiritual quest for understanding and higher purpose. I knew no matter what was coming my way, it was the intended path for my future. All this was meant to happen. I was to put my arms around the experience, embrace it as though it was the door to the rest of my life. That acceptance gave me the keys to the kingdom. It certainly helped me to have the right mindset to endure all that was still coming my way. The morning of August 7th, I continued to have this intense gratitude about making it through the night. It was a feeling of well-being that was unshakable. I heard through my husband that people had prayed for me, that friends sent long-distance Reiki, which is a form of alternative medicine developed by a Japanese Buddhist that helps to activate the body's healing process. Days later, I remember thinking, My blessings were so great. How would I be able to carry them, let alone thank all the people who sent positivity and love and light to my bedside? And what would I do with my life to live up to recovering from HLH when so many others had died? I said to God, if I survive this, please turn me into an angel so I can pay my debts. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the medical care and chemotherapy I received to wrestle HLH to the ground, the team that worked tirelessly to understand how HLH had played havoc with my immune system. During the first 30 days, I had 22 transfusions of platelets. I had chemo and a dozen other types of IV treatments, including Decadron, which is the steroid Lance Armstrong used to win the Tour de France. I told my family I was using Decadron to win the Tour de Vie. To pass the time on the ward, but mostly to remain undefeated in my mind, I power walked an hour a day, around and around the ward or outside when I was allowed. I was told to stay on the grounds of the hospital, but I imagined incredible future extensions to the Jewish General, and I walked west to Victoria and north to Van Horn. I did plank and push-ups, I lifted weights and did yoga. I wore a Fitbit and tried to get to 10,000 steps a day. As I said before, exercise was a key aspect of my physical and mental healing. It kept my heart and lungs working. It helped sustain high levels of serotonin. I meditated an hour a day to a solfeggio frequency on YouTube that is reputed to heal your DNA. This mindful practice brought me to a quiet acceptance of all that I had to face, as well as bringing me to a calmer state, very difficult with daily high doses of insomnia-inducing steroids. I practiced visual imagery. I saw myself walking with my future grandchildren. I pictured myself publishing my next book. I saw myself at the foaming edge of the Atlantic Ocean. It goes without saying that the chemotherapy and steroids saved my life, but everything else I did was for my mind. Like I said earlier, it's the existential pain that can take you underwater where it's impossible to breathe. All those ancillary tools of mindfulness were to help me offset the fear that comes with a deadly disease. The mind-body connection needs to be seamless. I was finally ready to go home from the hospital. Good thing, because I was beginning to look at the air ducts as a possible escape route. Through Hope and Cope, I was given my first wig. Thank you, Hinda. Thank God I could laugh myself silly, trying on the ones that made me look like Phyllis Diller or Edith Bunker. But wearing a wig made me feel like more like myself. But I remember one time I was walking along Sherbrooke Street and my wig blew off. I was as bald as a ping pong ball. There was a young man who was walking behind me. He was about 20 or 22. There was a look of shock on his face, but he quickly bent down, picked up my wig, handed it back to me, and I put it back on. And I said to him, "Have I got it on straight?" "No," he said, "I think we can make it better." He proceeded to fix my wig. I'll never forget him, and maybe he hasn't forgotten me either. I had 77 days of perfect wellness. During those days, I walked the city with Hal, dragging him out every night with the promise of ice cream cones if he came with me. I reconnected with the people I love. On New Year's Eve, Hal and I walked 15 kilometers along the beaches in Maine, smelling the salt air, bursting with gratitude. It was one of the happiest days in my marriage, in my life, really. And then the tires went off the tracks. HLH came back fast and hard, and this time I had a sickening feeling about the 60-day window. I called Dr. Shami and she told me to pack my bag, get a few things in order like bank accounts. She knew without even testing my blood that my immune system had once again gone haywire. She did a bone marrow biopsy in her examining room and then rushed off with the aspiration in the needle. She told me I would need a stem cell transplant if I had any hopes of surviving. I had to repeat the entire chemo protocol from the previous summer in order to have the best chance at surviving the transplant. On top of that, I would need a month of intrathecal brain chemo to rule out any involvement of the central nervous system. I intensified my mindfulness routines. Dr. Shami also said we would have to apply to the Royal Victoria Hospital and hope to get accepted as a patient. There are only 2 hospitals in Montreal that have stem cell transplant programs, and a finite number of beds and procedures are done each year. Hal and I went to our first interview with a member of the transplant team at the Royal Victoria. It would turn out to be the first transplant for HLH in the province of Quebec. It all felt quite surreal, but the global sharing of knowledge gave them the confidence about a treatment protocol. Several US hospitals had already looked at my file. It's funny how the little things that are burned in our memory are still alive. While we were waiting for the team to meet with us, I had an extreme case of butterflies. But I also had this intense feeling that I was about to jump through a one-way portal, that I would never be the same again. I would be forever changed by the people I would meet, the endurance test, and the lessons I would learn. The steeper the climb, the better the view from the top. We were told that with my fitness level, I had a 50% chance of surviving the transplant. That's huge, I thought. It's not 12 or 21, it's 50. And then Hal said, Susan, it's a coin toss. But we both agreed it was just a matter of being in the right pile. So later when people asked me what my odds were, I would always say 100% because I was over there in the good pile. After I was accepted into the Royal Victoria Stem Cell Program, which was a moment of euphoria, let me tell you, I was Snoopy dancing on the dining room table. I remember being told more than once that it was best not to become too friendly with any of the other patients or to even speak to anyone. Of course, I knew the coordinator was protecting me from the reality of the high death rate. But I also knew that that would not work for me. And in the end, the people in my life on and off the stem cell unit were what helped propel me to right now. A few things went topsy-turvy before I was admitted, the worst of which was the cancellation of my perfect match brother as my donor. He shares a gene that could possibly reinfect me with HLH, and he was therefore scratched. We went to the international donor list. There are 25 million people on the list, and one of those benevolent souls was my match. For the transplant, I was told I would spend about 50 days in isolation. The Royal Vic Stem Cell Ward is an unbelievable feat of medical mastery and engineering. You arrive via 3 closed doors into a ward that has a state-of-the-art air filtration system that protects the patient when their immune system has been removed to 0. But every room has a large window to keep you connected to the outside world. 2 days after I set up shop in my room with my weights, my new orange yoga mat, my new running shoes, a wooden angel, my lucky shamrock, my calendar with red cardinals to cross off each day, I went to pieces. It would be disingenuous to say there weren't some terrible days. I lay on the floor of the bathroom so nobody would hear me crying, and all the seams of my body opened up to let out my distress. I was so afraid that I wouldn't make it through 50 days in isolation. Could I run that marathon without practice? But then the unanticipated occurred. Even in isolation, the bonding on the stem cell unit began. Human connection is the undersung medication that propels us towards recovery. I saw it firsthand with the compassionate care from the doctors and nurses at the Jewish, and the same could be said at the MUHC. I must add, the doctors have the big ideas with the treatment plans. They fly overhead like a kite, but the nurses are the experts on the ground who deftly maneuver the strings. Long live the nurses. With such an engaged staff, I was able to re-embrace positivity. I pictured myself in the future, but I lived day by day, sometimes minute to minute. I remember all those wonderful aspects, and I've done my best to forget about the side effects. Your hair falls out, your muscles waste from the steroids, you have ulcers all along your digestive tract. I had profound nosebleeds and middle of the night transfusions. I had back pain that made it hard to breathe. There is a cardboard hat to collect your diarrhea. Let me tell you, you feel ugly. But there was my husband, Hal, every single morning at 7 a.m. with my cinnamon latte and making me feel beautiful inside. One of the most important parts of being a survivor for me was I believed with all my heart and soul and mind that I would live. But sometimes disease takes you anyway. Most of the others in my cohort who had the transplant didn't make it. The 50%, the 70%, the 90%. But I'm a better person for knowing them, for sharing the ride together. I remember we were all so hopeful when we were admitted, waving to each other through glass windows. We celebrated each other's small victories, like the doubling of the neutrophil count from 0.2 to 0.4, or a small rise in platelets after a transfusion. My memory of this experience will be forever tied to the others who were there on the ward fighting to live. So what is a stem cell transplant? Inside your bones, there's a hollow passage, and in that passage is where your blood is made. It's called bone marrow. Inside the marrow are red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and young immature cells called stem cells. Your body is making stem cells this very minute. The doctors removed all of my own bone marrow with chemotherapy. There was an eerie 4 days when I had 0 white blood cells and near 0 platelets. Germs of any kind are your enemy. Sneezing is your enemy. In fact, with one sneeze, I broke 2 blood vessels and needed a transfusion to get through the next day. I had no platelets and therefore no ability to clot those broken vessels. Across the world, somewhere unknown, in an extraordinary moment of synchronicity, my donor was giving blood at the Red Cross. That day, he was invited to join the stem cell registry. This was the very week my brother had been canceled. 2 weeks later, when his blood typing was entered into the system, it flashed that a Canadian woman was a perfect match. He was called at home that evening, and he jumped. Of course, I didn't know anything about this at the time. On June 2nd, I had my transplant. I was infused with stem cells from my anonymous donor. With that act of selflessness, he saved my life. There's no payment to the donor. It is done out of compassion alone. He sat in a lazy boy chair, and over a period of 9 hours, his blood was drawn from one arm into a machine via a plastic tube. The stem cells from his blood were extracted, and the blood was then returned to his other arm, minus the stem cells. It's a procedure called apheresis. All the while, a police officer sat in the hallway and then flew back to Montreal carrying the stem cells in a cooler. If the plane had gone down, well, it didn't. During the infusion of the stem cells, I listened to a playlist that had been created for that moment. I had asked a dozen family members to send me their favorite piece of music. The first track was called I Feel You by the German band Schiller. I can no longer hear that piece of music without choking up, but I will never forget that exact moment when the infusion of the stem cells began, my only chance of survival. The nursing staff respect that reverence for new life and left the room after they were certain it was working. Carly? So this was me 1 week before going into the my first day when I arrived. This was the day of the stem cell transplant. That pink bag are William Ashby Hall's stem cells. This was me 8 days after the transplant, 14 months after the transplant, and just 2 months ago, 5 years. So what did I learn? You heal and recover faster if you're fit. I exercised every day, even when I was dog tired, as it can improve resiliency at virtually every level of our physiology. I learned that you can't pull on your big girl panties every single day. It's normal to fall apart, to have doubts. Crying is a natural part of healing. After my transplant, I continued to meditate every day for an hour. The more frequently you meditate, the better you become at achieving calm. According to the practice of Zen, you should sit in meditation for 20 minutes every day, unless you are too busy. Then you should sit for an hour. I prayed to Archangel Raphael, the angel tasked with healing. I said thank you 50 times a day to the doctors and nurses and to the cleaning staff and to Mario, who washed my hand weights like I was his own daughter. I said thank you for every good thing that came my way. I imagined myself on the other side of the sidewalk, where the sun is always shining. You get better faster if you have good friends and a loving family. Other people certainly help you through something hard like this, my sister and brothers, my mother, Hal. There is no doubt that those people help you through a journey like this. But you have to look inside yourself first. The soul has to stand alone. No matter what you are facing in life, you can always choose your attitude, always. Being positive is a state of mind. Outcomes are outcomes. But living with happiness is a choice. It takes just as much energy to be happy as it does to be sad. I was able to do that. I know it's harder for some people. Another thing I learned is that pain and quality of life are two separate things. You can still laugh, make connections with people, and be present, even with a terrible backache. My friend Anne said to me, as I was about to face an entire year of chemotherapy treatment, "This is your life. Don't wish it away, not even one day." I have learned that there's no yardstick for joy without pain, and that the yardstick for strength is fragility. To that end, the devotion from my family, especially my husband Hal, is something I will carry around in my heart until my real death comes. They gave my life shape and purpose. And Hal also reminded me that it was temporary. And on the issue of temporary, I had an epiphany of sorts on the stem cell unit. I work as a volunteer with the mentally ill at the Douglas Hospital, and all of a sudden I was aligned with the patients I was working with. The closed unit accessed by several layers of doors, the endless medication and side effects, and what would my life look like beyond the doors of the hospital? The loneliness and isolation of the unit. But the immediate insight for me was that where I will taper and hopefully be symptom-free in a matter of years. But those with schizophrenia have a life sentence because of stigma and marginalization. I wrote the first draft of the Ghost Garden at the Jewish General Hospital. My purpose-driven life was being rolled out from the K Pavilion. I was able to withstand much of the pain, knowing that in my case, it would end. My crisis would end one way or another. Those with mental illness do not have the same luxury of knowing that they too will one day walk away from their experience, walk away from their diagnosis. So maybe the great takeaway is this: we are not here to achieve or earn. We are here to experience, and that means everyone has an equal chance at happiness and living a purposeful life. It dismantles the idea of having to be a winner. We are all winners and survivors and thrivers. As Hemingway says, we are all broken and we have to find our power in the broken pieces. And so my path as a caretaker of the mentally ill, be it writer or volunteer, was infused with a bright white light. I know where I am going. The stem cell journey was a great gift of insight, and I hope to God to continue to make good on all that I've been given. People have asked me, am I changed by all this? I'm still me, of course, but death can be an amazing teacher. We simply do not know when it's our last day. If you knew that death was to come in 4 weeks or 3 months, you might reflect upon what you want from life. Every detail of what you desire comes sharply into focus. You loved your family more intensely, your sister, your daughter, your marriage. So what has changed for me is my attempt to preserve the sanctity of all that I hold dear. Guard my human possessions. In other words, I'm not changing my life, I'm changing how I live my life. So don't wait for the faulty scaffolding to do your own heavy lifting. The Jacques Cartier Bridge. From the earliest days after my transplant, I began to write thank you letters to my donor, sending them into the ether, knowing that no contact can happen for 2 years. The death rate is too high. The first letter simply said, it's been 100 days. The first hurdle, I'm alive. The second letter said, it's been 1 year. Thank you for the miraculous gift of your stem cells. The third letter said, I would love to look you in the eye and thank you for giving me a second chance at living my life. William Ashby Hall contacted me 27 months after my transplant. It was one of the most transcendent moments of my life. We made a plan to meet. The day I was to meet William and his husband, Michael Ashby Hall, I couldn't stop crying. I felt like I was carrying the Olympic torch for everyone who'd had a transplant, and the moment had a gravitas that was indescribable. My family had gathered from 3 cities, Montreal, New York, and Boston. On the morning of January 17th, 2019, at the Grosvenor Hotel on Park Lane in London, England, my eyes were pink and puffy. I walked into the hotel bar and asked the hostess if I could book a table for 8 people at 5 p.m. My son and daughter were by my side, and she asked me if it was a family reunion. I said yes, but that it was probably unlike any family reunion she'd ever heard about. I told her I was meeting the British man who'd saved my life with his stem cells. We left the bar, and she immediately went to the general manager, and they Googled my name. The first story that popped up was a radio interview from the night before with Carol Off of CBC's As It Happens. The headline ran, 1 in 25 million, how an unlikely bone marrow match saved a Montrealer's life. When we took our seats around the long table and champagne was uncorked, William and I were mashed together as though we'd been hatched from a single eggshell. We were smitten. And then the lights flickered and the chef appeared with a blazing cake with a chocolate calligraphy inscription that said, you are 1 in 25 million. It was hospitality at its most extraordinary. It was humans recognizing the absolute power of connection. And how do you ever properly thank a young donor for such an altruistic gesture? You can't. But over time, I have come to see that giving a life to someone else has an equal magnitude to being on the receiving end. To give is to receive. Buckingham Palace was just across the grassy green where we met, but royalty was disguised in the heart of one ordinary man from St. Albans who signed the registry and saved a life. In closing, I owe my life to Dr. April Shammy and to the stem cell team at the Royal Vic, doctors who've given a significant part of themselves to diagnosing and curing people. I feel a sense of duty to live up to their work. My husband and I planted a tree in our front yard to honor Dr. Shammy, and a tree in our backyard to honor my stem cell donor, William Ashby Hall. They represent love, compassion, life, growth, and strength. And maybe one day those 2 trees will be able to carry the weight of 40,000 birds. Thank you so much for listening.
Susan, I don't think we have a dry eye in this audience. Thank you so much for sharing such an incredible story with us. I'd like to invite, if anybody has any questions for Susan, please feel free to put them in the chat. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carly Berlin. I'm the Wellness Center Program Manager at Hope & Cope, and we are so, so glad to have Susan with us. So now is your chance to put something in the chat. I may not have any questions.
Can you put that in? I don't know how to turn it on.
Susan, we have a message here that says you have admirable strength. Thank you for sharing your struggle and victory.
Well, I hope there are others in the room who feel as empowered by their own experience and You know, as I said earlier, I'm here telling my story, but everybody has a powerful experience to share. And I'm just really grateful to be here telling my story. Thank you.
That's so true. Curious, there's one question about your spirituality, which is just so incredible to hear about and to experience just for us as well. Were you this spiritual before your illness, or do you think some of it came with the journey you went through?
I was always spiritual. And, you know, Hinda knows that there are so many things that happened to me, angel moments at the Jewish. And I mean, I've told Hinda that I believe the Jewish general is haunted, and that's because there are so many generations of Holocaust people who've died who are looking after patients in the hospital. I had so many things happen to me, and there just wasn't time to tell everybody all the things that happened. But yes, I've always been spiritual, and this affirmed it 100-fold. This whole journey has affirmed my faith time and again. Yeah.
We have a lot of people just saying thank you so much for your story, and this was just so incredible. You know, thank you for sharing such an inspiring story. And it sounds like we may all be a little bit wordless for now.
May I add something?
Yes, of course. Where are you, Sheila?
You don't know me, but everybody up on that picture, they all know me well. I'm never speechless. Today, I'm speechless. That is a story that I will never forget. And you are 1 in 25 million. I'm going to, after this program, I'd like to call you during the week. You're inspirational. It was a story that I'm speechless. I mean that. And I'm never speechless. God bless you.
Thank you so much.
Good luck to you and lots of strength.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. That means so much coming from our incredible founder.
She is incredible. She's a very incredible human being.
Yeah.
1 in 25 million. She's 1 in 25 million.
It's true.
We weren't sure who the cake was for both of us.
God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. I really appreciate it.
Story of a lifetime.
Yeah, that is very true. I think I may turn it over to our executive director with all of that. Thank you so much. And Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carly. Susan, that was really 1 in 25 million, I guess, is the best way to say it. Really a touching story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. So, hello, everyone. My name is Eric Kumar. I'm the executive director of Hope and Cope, and I started the job literally 2 days before the COVID pandemic disrupted all of our lives and our plans. As Susan described so well, cancer is a great disruptor, an unwelcome intruder, and the only way to get through it is really to face it head on. So Susan, thank you. Your story is incredible. It's vulnerable and it's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing your doubts, your challenges, your darkest moments, your hard-earned victory, and your triumphs. Thank you for giving us so much to think about, a roadmap of how to build our own inner resilience, and mostly thank you for your wisdom. A big thank you also to our Survivorship Day Planning Committee, consisting of staff and a group of very dynamic and creative volunteers. They've been working for months to put this event together, and they can be very proud of the success of this evening. Volunteers are such an important part of every aspect of our organization. We couldn't function without them. Je voudrais aussi remercier nos commanditaires. Thank you to our sponsors for contributing such amazing prizes and for helping to make this a truly festive evening. Thank you for demonstrating the power of community support to lift our spirits. En cette magnifique soirée de printemps, je vous remercie à tous d'avoir pris le temps d'assister à cet événement. If you are new to Hope and Cope, I encourage you to visit our website, www.hopeandcope.ca, to see what we offer. Our staff and our volunteers are always happy to help you find the program that's right for you. And now the moment we've all been waiting for, the announcement of our prize winners. If you see your name here, it means that you have won a prize. We will be in touch with you and let you know about the next steps. I wish all of you a wonderful summer. Hope and Cope is here for you all year long. Whenever you need us, please don't hesitate and reach out to us via our website or via our phone, 514-340-8255. Susan, thank you again.
Bear with us for a few more minutes, everyone. We're just going through the list of prizes, and thank you so much for being here. If you see your name, as Eric said, we will be in touch with you to coordinate getting you your prizes. That's it. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everybody, for coming.